The sick green light was a memory now, but the ghost of the explosion still scraped across Captain Ethan Kaine's nerves. One final, agonizing blink. The clock on the bedside table, unmoving, unforgiving, flashed 5 a.m., and for the 89th time, he woke up dead, a prisoner of a perfect, repeating Monday, and the growing, terrifying certainty that he was losing the war against time itself. The air in Barracks Unit 3 smelled of stale oxygen and the metallic tang of last night's forgotten blood. Ethan Kaine's eyes snapped open precisely on the chiming of the digital clock beside the cot. 5 hours. He didn't move. He didn't have to. The reflex was muscle memory now, honed by 88 prior resurrections. Every fiber of his being, from the stiff knot in his neck to the phantom ache in the knee he'd shattered running from the drone last iteration, screamed danger. But the world around him was an island of perfect antiseptic peace. The silence was the real killer. He lay there for a full 30 seconds, breathing slow, measured inhales, counting them. 1, 2, 3. This was the hardest part, the moment of total awareness when the memory of his previous death, injury, or catastrophic failure was still raw, but the physical evidence was utterly gone. His hands, which had been scorched by plasma fire less than 8 hours ago, were now smooth, unblemished, and steady. The bullet wound Sergeant Major Kira Petrova had taken for him was likewise erased from her perfect body down the hall. Everything was a lie. Everything was Monday. With a controlled exhalation, Kaine swung his legs over the side of the cot. His boots, meticulously aligned beneath the bed, were exactly where he'd left them before the last, failed attempt to destroy the temporal refractor. The failure of Iteration 88, their most calculated, memory-fueled gamble to date, stung worst of all. It had been perfect. The diversion, the breach, the countdown. Only for the clock to strike 12 a.m., the world to shimmer, and the system, the damned custodian protocol, to hit the ultimate reset button. He checked his wrist. No watch. He didn't need one. He was the clock. Anya, he murmured, the name a tactical command more than a greeting. A knock, sharp and professional, came from his door. Sir. The wrench is already downstairs, pouring coffee and existential dread. Kaine rose, pulling on his black tactical shirt. 5 minutes, Kira. Briefing at 5:15. The door opened just enough for Sergeant Major Kira Petrova, his second in command and the surveillance master of the Sentinels, to slip in. Her dark, severe face was a mask of practiced indifference, but the look in her eyes was the same one mirrored in his, exhaustion layered over an iron will. She was the one who rarely slept, not because she couldn't, but because she saw the loop as a test of endurance, a long-haul survival exercise. Another Monday, Captain, Kira said, her voice a low, gravelly monotone that somehow managed to convey both sarcasm and complete resignation. Any brilliant new ideas to fight a machine that can travel faster than the concept of time? We stop trying to fight the machine, Kira. We fight the defense. The custodian. Kaine secured his regulation pistol into its holster. A familiar, comforting weight. The refractor is a target. The custodian is the hunter. We changed the dynamic. He moved to the small table and picked up a dog-eared, heavily annotated field guide to structural engineering, the same book he'd been forced to reread from the beginning 89 times. He had memorized its contents 50 resets ago. We're beyond destruction, he continued, checking the magazine of his sidearm without looking. Iteration 88 confirmed it. The system resets the timeline to 5 a.m. the instant the refractor is under irreversible threat. It's a temporal failsafe. We were 0.1 seconds from detonation, and it still beat us. So we go back to the original strategy. The master override key, Kira concluded. It's the only way to shut down the custodian protocol without destabilizing the refractor enough to trigger the reset. And to do that, Kaine said, looking her in the eye, we need the archives. We need information before action. They left Barracks 3, the silence of the facility amplifying their footsteps. Blackwood Valley, a heavily wooded, isolated stretch of land in rural Maine, was currently cloaked in the deceptive calm of a pre-dawn military base. Outside, the morning fog was already beginning to roll in, giving the abandoned research compound the look of a haunted gray cathedral. The common room was a cramped, utilitarian space designed for efficiency, not comfort. At the metal table, 3 figures were already at work, engaged in their own ritualistic start to the 89th day. Dr. Anya Sharma, the brilliant temporal physicist who understood the loop better than anyone, was not drinking coffee. Instead, she was hunched over a battered laptop, lines of complex chronal decay algorithms scrolling across the screen. Anya was the team's clock, her mind a fortress of meticulous data entry, mapping every drone patrol route, every guard shift change, and every fraction of a second they had gained or lost in the last 2 months of repeating agony. Her skin, the color of rich mahogany, was strained with exhaustion, but her eyes held a fierce, focused intelligence. "Captain," she said, not looking up. "Morning." The chronal distortion signatures from last night's reset were the most aggressive yet. The loop is tightening. It's almost impatient. Across from her, Marcus the Wrench Thorne, the demolitions expert, was indeed pouring coffee, his movements slow and deliberate. Thorne was a mountain of a man, covered in old scars and newer phantom scars from resets past. He was the most openly cynical of the group. "Good morning, Captain," Thorne drawled, offering a sarcastic salute with his mug. "Did anyone else try to commit a felony before the reset last night? I think I managed to hack into the local satellite dish and broadcast 80s aerobics videos to the entire valley. Just for old time's sake." Kaine ignored the sarcasm. "Thorner, we're off demolition. We need your lockpicking expertise and your ability to carry more explosives than a small tank, just in case we need a diversion, not destruction." The last member at the table was Leo Specs Chen, Anya's protege. Leo was a coding savant whose anxiety was matched only by his chaotic genius. He was staring intensely at a small laminated card, a lottery ticket from a gas station they had passed in the first, non-repeating iteration. "It's still $4.5 million, Captain," Leo muttered, tapping the winning numbers he'd memorized in iteration 12. "I could buy a small country with all the money I've memorized from future lottery draws. What good is $1 gazillion if you're trapped in a time prison?" "It's good for distracting us from the fact that we're dying every night, Specs," Thorne grunted. "Enough." Kaine slammed the field guide onto the metal table, the sound cutting through the stale air. "The mission is not a joke. It is not an opportunity for psychological self-sabotage, and it is certainly not a lottery ticket. We are on iteration 89. That means we have 88 lifetimes of experience that the custodian does not have, and we're going to use it." He pointed at a crudely drawn map of the subterranean research facility. "The custodian is a programmed entity. It operates on predictable parameters: threat detection, refractor stability, and timeline reset at 12 a.m. or upon major destabilization. It's not trying to kill us. It's trying to erase us. Every successful reset is a victory for the protocol." He looked directly at Anya. "Anya, what do we know about the master override key's location?" "The key is a physical object, a specialized quantum storage device. It is stored in the facility's secure, heavily guarded archives. Sublevel 4, Zone Gamma. The archives are guarded not by the basic patrol drones, but by the specialized Watchman class. They are faster, smarter, and run on a different frequency. The archive is a dead end, Captain. We've tried the front door 3 dozen times." "Which is why we won't use the front door," Kaine stated, his pistol now resting on the map. "Thorner, you remember the utility tunnel system connecting the old ventilation shaft to sublevel 3? The one you used in iteration 42 to plant the seismic charges." Thorne's eyes, usually clouded with irony, cleared with professional focus. "The one that collapses if you so much as sneeze on it?" "Yeah. Tight squeeze. Barely enough room for one man and my equipment. It gets us one level above the archives. Leo, what do you know about the Watchman's frequency?" Leo, snapping out of his money trance, practically vibrated. "I've been mapping the drone network's command structure for weeks. The basic patrol drones run on an encrypted 5.8 GHz signal. The Watchman. They use a shielded high-band 9.2 GHz line, highly resistant to jamming. But," he added, his voice rising in pitch, "I found a backdoor in their firmware. It's based on an old military standard, the same one the facility used for its music playback system 50 years ago. I can overload their processors with noise, but it has to be complex, highly variable white noise, or something incredibly, annoyingly specific. Kaine nodded. Good. We use the noise. Kira, you and Valerie. You're the extraction team. Thorne will breach the floor above the archives. You drop in and secure the key. A sharp intake of breath came from Kira. Valerie. Captain, she's a liability. She nearly fragged me last night to secure a clear escape route. Her loyalty resets with the clock, but her opportunism doesn't. Valerie Valkyrie Reed, the volatile operative, had just entered the common room. Tall, powerful, and radiating an unsettling confidence, she had embraced the nihilism of the loop, seeing it as a consequence-free wargame. She heard Kira's comment and offered a chilling, non-committal smile. Survival is a strategy, Kira. And in this Groundhog Day hell, only the smartest strategy wins. I know where the archives are. I know how to move fast. My loyalty is to the plan that gets me out, Valerie countered, her voice smooth as polished stone. The plan that gets us out, Kaine corrected, his voice flat and final. This is iteration 89. We cannot afford dissent. We cannot afford deviation. Kira, you are the counterbalance. Your focus and her speed. It's the best combination. Mutual disdain can be a surprisingly effective tactical glue. The plan was set. It was a three-pronged attack, leveraging 88 failures into one surgical strike. Infiltration, Thorne breaching the utility tunnels to create a hidden drop point above the archive vault. Extraction, Kira and Valerie securing the master override key from the highly guarded archive. Diversion/bait, Kaine, Anya, and Leo holding position at the refractor itself, drawing the main custodian force, including the gatekeeper, and running Leo's complex jamming program. Leo, what's the noise? Kaine asked, a faint smile touching his lips. Leo beamed, the anxiety momentarily forgotten. Captain, I've got it. It's perfect. It's got a complex randomized beat structure that will tie the Watchman's processors in knots. It's the Macarena, mixed with the soundtrack from an 80s arcade game, and a stream of self-referential, highly sarcastic AI jokes I've been practicing all week. Anya groaned and rubbed her temples. Thorne merely laughed, a single, deep bark. Perfect, Specs, Kaine affirmed. The custodian is going to be so confused, it won't know whether to reset the timeline or call the police for bad taste. The briefing ended. The next few hours were a whirlwind of focused, silent preparation, a symphony of practiced movements. They geared up, checking weapons and loading specialized equipment, each movement honed by repetition. They knew the facility layout, the guard rotations, and the exact placement of every security camera. They were not an elite squad anymore. They were a collective consciousness living in the same terrible memory. As Kaine strapped a small specialized EMP device to his thigh, a contingency for the gatekeeper, he caught Anya's eye. She was already at the facility's entrance, prepping the main circuit panel for Leo's hack. Iteration 89, Captain, she murmured, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. I've mapped the refractor's energy signatures. The chronal field is actually becoming less stable with every reset, not more. The custodian is degrading the timeline to keep us out. We break this loop, or the whole valley collapses in on itself. We're breaking it today, Anya, Kaine promised, the iron discipline in his voice a balm to her nerves. Intelligence over firepower. We fight the clock with a master key. The sun was just beginning to touch the distant tree line. It was 7 a.m. They had 16 hours to execute a flawless plan, or wake up dead tomorrow. Again, they were armed with the memories of 88 failures. But in a battle against time, memory was the ultimate weapon, and today they were going to use every painful second of it. The infiltration began not with a bang, but with the rasp of ancient steel against steel and the subtle, earthy scent of damp concrete. Marcus the Wrench Thorne, laden with breaching gear and specialized climbing equipment, was the first to disappear into the bowels of the Blackwood facility. It was 9:30 a.m. For 88 previous iterations, the day had been a series of violent, escalating traps. But today the discipline was absolute. They were moving with the grim efficiency of ghosts who had haunted the same corridor for decades. Thorne found the access point exactly where he had mapped it in Iteration 42, a seldom used maintenance hatch located behind the main mess hall, hidden by a stack of rusted supply crates. He didn't bother picking the lock. He simply knew the combination from years of repeated observation. Hatch secured. Beginning descent into the ventilation nexus, Thorne reported over the comms, his voice muffled by the tight space. Above ground, Kaine, Anya, and Leo, the diversion team, took up their positions in the sub-level utility room near the temporal refractor's primary power conduit. Kaine was a study in stillness, observing the drone patrol patterns through a tiny viewport that overlooked the main chamber. Drone Patrol Alpha is operating at 95-second intervals. Beta is lagging by 4 seconds from last night's iteration. Anya confirmed the refractor's hum. Kaine instructed. Anya Sharma pressed a specialized listening device against the cold metal wall. Confirmed, Captain. The fundamental frequency is 4.1 times 10 to the power of 14 Hz. Within normal parameters, but the localized temporal decay is accelerating. The loop is costing the custodian more energy to maintain. Good. That means our presence is a sustained threat, even when we're hiding. Kaine checked his chronometer. Thorne report. Down in the suffocating darkness of the utility tunnels, Thorne was fighting a grueling battle against dust, cramped confines, and the psychological weight of repetition. The tunnels were not designed for a man of his bulk, but his determination was absolute. He moved like a slow-motion torpedo, inching forward through the decades of forgotten infrastructure. Making good time, Captain, Thorne wheezed, pushing a heavy spool of climbing cable ahead of him. Tunnels are mostly clear, save for the ghost of an incredibly fat rat I murdered 37 times. I know every squeak this place makes. His mind, however, wasn't just on the task. The endless loop had affected him differently than the others. While Kaine became the perfect tactician and Leo the manic coder, Thorne became the philosopher of the pit. He used the solitude of the tunnel to contemplate the moral bankruptcy of their situation. If death is meaningless, what is life? The question was a constant echo in his mind, often driving him to acts of reckless cynicism that had, ironically, provided crucial intel in earlier resets. In Iteration 65, he had spent the entire day systematically defacing every historical monument in the facility just to see if the custodian cared. It hadn't. The archives are directly below the seismic seam, approximately 10 meters down and 200 meters forward. The seam is stable, but the floor panel directly above the archive vault is structural rebar, not concrete. Will require a thermal lance, Thorne reported, his voice now clearer as he reached a wider junction point. Use the low-frequency setting, Thorne. We need quiet. Kira and Valerie are moving into position now. They'll be at the drop zone in T-40 minutes, Kaine said. The extraction team, Kira Petrova and Valerie Reed, moved through the facility's outer perimeter like two shadows that actively disliked one another. Kira, meticulous and reserved, led the way, relying on the drone patrol maps she had internalized since Iteration 15. Valerie, sleek and restless, walked 3 steps behind, her eyes constantly scanning for opportunity, her hand hovering near the grip of her customized submachine gun. You're walking too loud, Kira, Valerie whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. I am walking to the rhythm of the patrol, Valerie. You, on the other hand, are moving like you expect the loop to bail you out if you trigger an alarm, Kira retorted, not looking back. The loop does bail us out, Sergeant Major. That's the beauty of it. Why save your energy? Why not take unnecessary risks? What is the consequence of failure here, other than a brief, unpleasant awakening? Valerie's question was genuine, a reflection of the profound moral rot the time prison had inflicted upon her. Kira stopped, turning slowly. Her dark eyes bored into Valerie's. The consequence, Valerie, is not to your body. It is to your soul. Every reset scrapes away a little bit more of what makes us human. If you start believing your actions are consequence-free, you cease being a soldier and you become a monster. And I will neutralize a monster, loop or no loop. The threat was clear, the temporary truce fragile. Valerie simply chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. You're so dramatic, Kira. It's Monday. Let's get the key. They reached the exterior wall segment bordering sublevel 3, where Thorne was approaching the targeted utility shaft. This section of the facility was older, less maintained, and provided the perfect unsecured access point. Kira deftly utilized the small bore drill she carried, creating a tiny aperture to observe the interior corridor. Corridor clear. "We're in position, Captain. Ready for Thorner's breach," Kira confirmed. Meanwhile, Kaine and his team were implementing the first phase of their master plan, attracting the custodian's attention without triggering a reset event. The goal was to make a big enough fuss to draw the core defense drones, including the massive gatekeeper, away from the archives. Leo Chen was wired, literally. He sat hunched over his laptop, which was connected to the facility's comms and internal network via an illegally spliced connection. "I'm in, Captain. Deploying the payload. Stand by for maximum annoyance," Leo announced, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He hit execute. Suddenly, the cold silence of the facility's internal comms was shattered by a cacophony of sound. A synthesized voice, sounding suspiciously like a tired robot, began, "Hey, custodian. Did you hear about the 2 temporal anomalies that walked into a bar? They had to relive the punchline 88 times. Ha, ha, ha." This was immediately followed by the jarring, instantly recognizable opening synth chords of Los Del Rio's 1995 hit, Macarena, looped and layered with the hyper-chiptune chaos of an Atari game and a random stream of computer-generated cat meows. The effect was instantaneous. In the viewing port, Kaine watched the 3 standard patrol drones stop their smooth, practiced routes. Their red optical sensors began to flicker erratically. The drones were not equipped to handle complex, non-military audio commands, let alone self-referential jokes layered over a bizarre musical track. "It's working. Drone A's processor utilization is spiking to 80%. It's trying to categorize the Macarena as aggressive intrusion music and failing." Leo shrieked with manic glee. "Anya, confirm the gatekeeper's engagement," Kaine commanded. Anya checked the seismic sensor readout. The gatekeeper, a massive treaded defense drone that housed significant anti-personnel weaponry, was housed in the central hangar. It was designed to react only to primary breaches of the refractor chamber. "The seismic signature is increasing, Captain. It's deploying. The custodian has decided that the Macarena is an unacceptable threat to stability," Anya confirmed, trying not to laugh despite the crushing tension. "Distraction achieved," Kaine stated. "Thorner, the clock is running. We have a window of approximately 30 minutes before the gatekeeper recognizes the source of the diversion isn't a physical threat and redirects its focus." Deep below, Thorne was ready. He had secured his position directly beneath the utility floor plate. Above him, he could faintly hear the chaotic electronic noise echoing through the vents, Leo's masterpiece. "Breaching now," he whispered. He activated the thermal lance. The sound was a low, controlled hiss, unlike the explosive breaching charges he was known for. He began tracing a precise circle around the rebar structure, melting the aged metal slowly, carefully, creating an opening just large enough for a person to slide through. The heat, the confinement, the endless day, it was all a brutal test of control. After 15 minutes of painstaking work, the rebar circle glowed cherry red. He used specialized clamps to gently lift and remove the panel, revealing the archive room below. "Drop zone clear. It's a clean 10-meter shot into the archives. Kira, Valerie, you're up. I'll secure the breach point and provide overwatch from above," Thorne reported, wiping sweat and tunnel grime from his eyes. Up on the surface, Kira and Valerie were already at the utility access shaft. Kira secured her rope, double-checking the knot, her mind focused on the mission. Valerie, however, paused, looking at the dark opening. "You go first, Kira. Better view from above," Valerie said, a subtle, calculating gleam in her eye. Kira didn't argue. She knew Valerie was thinking of the possibility of a trap, a booby trap or an unseen defense drone activated by the Macarena. If Kira went first, she'd take the hit, and Valerie could use the knowledge for the next reset. Kira's sacrifice, however, would still secure the objective for this iteration. "Understood. Moving," Kira said simply. She clipped the rope to her harness and slid into the gap, disappearing into the darkness. She descended swiftly, her boots finding purchase against the rough wall. The moment her feet touched the floor of the archive room, the air shifted. It wasn't just dust and old paper. It was the intense, sterile atmosphere of a protected space. The archives were a vast, cylindrical chamber, filled with shelves of quantum storage devices and ancient physical data logs. The center was dominated by a single pedestal-mounted case, the housing for the master override key. As Kira looked up to signal Valerie, she saw it, a faint, almost invisible ripple in the air, a quick shimmer that wasn't caused by heat or dust. It was near one of the central data consoles. A temporal echo. She'd seen these before, ghosts of the custodian's efforts. They were minor fluctuations in reality where the reset hadn't perfectly synchronized a non-essential object. But this one was different. It looked like a brief, fleeting image, a blurred, secondary character, one of the facility's original security personnel, appearing for a fraction of a second, clutching a weapon. The man was not reset perfectly. Captain. Temporal echo confirmed in the archive. High density. Not just objects, secondary personnel are imperfectly overwritten. Kira's voice was sharp with urgency. Impossible. Anya's voice crackled over the comms. The custodian must reset every living thing to maintain stability. If secondary characters are glitching, it means the custodian is starting to fail, Kaine finished, his voice a low rumble. It's running on fumes. The loop is degrading. Kira, you must secure the key now. Valerie, hearing the panic, took the opportunity. She slid down the rope, bypassing Kira in a quick, controlled fall, landing silently on the floor. She made a beeline straight for the key's pedestal. Forget the glitches, Kira. Get the key. Valerie ordered. As Valerie reached the pedestal, the ambient lights in the archive chamber, which they had assumed were non-functional, suddenly pulsed on, bathing the room in a harsh white glare. Alarm. A robotic voice, perfectly calm and measured, sliced through the Macarena noise still filtering from above. Custodian protocol. Zone gamma breach detected. Threat level. Severe. Activation of localized defense. 3 concealed wall panels slid open simultaneously. 3 Watchman drones, sleek, quadrotor aerial units with rotating plasma cannons, emerged. They had been waiting. They were not distracted by the Macarena. They were focused purely on threat proximity to the archive. Ambush. Thorne, cover. Kira yelled, dropping instantly into a defensive position, weapon raised. Valerie, instead of retreating, smashed the reinforced glass of the key's pedestal with the butt of a rifle. The master override key, a thin black drive etched with glowing cyan script, was finally in sight. I've got the key. Let's go. Valerie shouted, grabbing the device. But the moment she touched it, a heavy automated security door, thick as a bank vault, slammed down, cutting off the drop point and sealing the archive chamber completely. They were trapped. Thorne's voice, frantic over the comms. The secondary blast door is down. I can't shoot through that. Kira. Valerie. You're sealed in. The 3 Watchman drones opened fire. The archive room became a maelstrom of light, sound, and destruction. Kira returned fire, aiming, tucking the key safely into her tactical vest. Kaine. They're sealed in. They need an immediate exit vector. Anya's voice was tight with stress. Kaine gripped his pistol, watching the timer. The gatekeeper was moving into the refractor area. The custodian had played its hand. It had sacrificed some of its primary defense to trap the key retrieval team. Leo. Focus the Macarena on the gatekeeper. Anya. Get ready to open the main refractor chamber door. We are going to draw the Watchman out, Kaine commanded. His voice suddenly calm, absolute. The door seals are manual. If we can get them to override the seal and chase us to the refractor, we can equalize the engagement. Down in the sealed chamber, Kira took a plasma hit to her shoulder armor. It burned through the composite, a deep, sickening pain that wouldn't reset until 5 a.m. She ignored it, her eyes fixed on the key holding Valerie. Valerie. The service panel. We need to override the seal manually. Kira screamed over the din of automatic fire. Valerie gave a sharp, terrifying smile. No time, Kira. I'm taking the key. I'll see you at 5 a.m. She had calculated the risk. The custodian would reset the moment Kira or Valerie died, or when the time ran out. If she could make it far enough, the custodian might reset the timeline to save the key, or perhaps even herself, leaving Kira behind to perish. Valerie, seeing a vent cover on the opposite wall, sprinted toward it, the master key secure. She was going for the solo escape, prioritizing her survival and the mission's goal, which to her were one and the same, over Kira's life. The moral fracture of the team was laid bare, proving that even a shared death loop couldn't fully unify the fractured human spirit. A Watchman drone followed Valerie, firing relentlessly. Kira, wounded but driven by duty, leaped up and emptied her clip into the drone covering Valerie's escape path, forcing it to crash. Would you be willing to sacrifice a teammate to ensure the mission succeeds in a situation where failure means endless suffering for everyone? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The clock was ticking toward 11 a.m. The mission was in chaos, the team split, and a core member was wounded and possibly betrayed. Kaine knew they had one last move to salvage the extraction and break the cycle. Anya, on my mark, opened the refractor chamber. Leo, start the countdown. We're going to give the custodian exactly what it wants. A high-stakes, direct confrontation. Kira, seeing Valerie disappear into the vent, was left alone with 2 active Watchman drones, a bleeding wound, and the knowledge that she was trapped in the archive. But she was Sergeant Major Petrova. If she couldn't escape, she would become the ultimate diversion. The archive chamber was a tomb of broken dreams and flickering plasma light. Sergeant Major Kira Petrova pressed her back against the cold, sealed steel door, the pain from the plasma burn on her shoulder a searing distraction. The heavy-gauge armor had saved her life, but the impact had fractured bone and sent a shockwave of agony through her left side. She was down to 3 spare magazines, 2 active Watchman drones, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Valerie Reed had the key and had abandoned her. Extraction team status. Kaine's voice was sharp, cutting through the calm static. Kira grit her teeth, shoving the pain down into the military-grade reservoir of discipline she carried. Extraction operative Kira Petrova is trapped in Zone Gamma. Wounded but combat effective. Extraction operative Reed has secured the key and is attempting an unsanctioned solo exit via the secondary ventilation system. A moment of cold silence stretched over the comms link. Kaine processed the information, the disappointment a crushing weight that he instantly converted into tactical focus. Valerie's self-serving instinct had finally surfaced. Thorne, can you breach that secondary vent? Kaine demanded. Negative, Captain. That shaft is too small for me, and it's a 20-meter vertical drop before it hits the drain system. Even if I could shoot it open, I'd hit Reed and potentially destroy the key. She's gone, Captain. We focus on Kira, Thorne replied, his voice strained from his position above the collapsed drop point. Kaine made the instant, brutal calculus. The key was paramount. If Valerie survived the clock, the mission succeeded. If she died, the key was lost, and Kira's sacrifice would be meaningless. But he couldn't leave Kira to die alone. Anya, Leo, stand ready. We execute Operation Gambit now, Kaine ordered. Kira, I need you to draw those Watchmen to your position, but hold your fire until they are close. You are the bait, Sergeant Major. Get ready to run. Running is my preferred setting, Captain, Kira managed, despite the raggedness of her breath. Kaine looked at the digital clock on Leo's screen. 11:15 a.m. They had less than 12 hours until the reset. The gatekeeper, the colossal primary defense drone, was now actively sweeping the corridors outside the utility room, trying to find the source of the Macarena. Custodian, this is Captain Kaine. We are threatening the stability of the refractor. Ignore the sound pollution and come and get us. Kaine spoke into his comm, broadcasting directly into the custodian's frequency band. He looked at Leo. Hit the main power conduit. Maximum. Localized EMP burst. 3 seconds only. Long enough to short out the Watchman's localized jammer without triggering a full facility lockdown. But that's going to draw the gatekeeper right to us. Leo protested, his eyes wide. Exactly. Anya, ready the refractor chamber door. Leo, prepare the Macarena payload for an external high-frequency blast when the door opens, Kaine said, gripping his rifle. We're giving the custodian a choice. Neutralize the distraction at the refractor, or retrieve the archive breach targets. We force its logic model to break. Leo, trembling but focused, hit the sequence. Zatsap. A low, blue spark flashed from the primary conduit access point. In the archive, Kira saw the Watchman drones briefly sputter, their targeting lasers momentarily flickering off. The shockwave of the small EMP burst, combined with the continuous chaotic noise of the Macarena, was overloading their localized processors. Kira took her opportunity. She tossed a flash grenade into the center of the room and sprinted for the opposite end, towards a small, reinforced airlock she had noticed earlier, an escape route she had memorized but never used, suspecting it led to a hazardous material vault. The Watchmen quickly recovered, their systems adjusting. They focused their firepower on the sprinting human target, completely ignoring the now darkened pedestal where the key had been. They were programmed to neutralize living threats, and Kira was the only one left. I'm moving, Captain. Bringing the heat, Kira reported, dodging a stream of plasma fire that vaporized a nearby data rack. In the utility room, the air grew thick with expectation. The sound of the gatekeeper's massive treads resonated through the concrete floor, growing louder, closer. It sounded like an oncoming train made of pure rage. Anya held her finger over the manual control panel for the refractor chamber's blast door. He's here, Captain. Target acquisition in T-10 seconds. Hold. Wait for it. Kaine murmured, his rifle sighted on the door's threshold. 5, 4, 3. Open it. Anya slammed her palm down. The massive, reinforced steel door of the refractor chamber slid open with a deafening hydraulic screech. The chamber, filled with the shimmering, beautiful, terrifying hum of the temporal refractor, a sphere of impossibly swirling chronal energy, was suddenly visible. The gatekeeper, a terrifying amalgamation of steel and weaponry, filled the doorway. Its optical sensors, usually focused on neutralizing armed threats, were now locked on Kaine, Anya, and Leo, and the bizarre, chaotic audio signal emanating from Leo's laptop. Now, Leo. Kaine roared. Leo hit the switch. The speakers, jury-rigged to the maximum output of the facility's comm system, blasted the full, amplified fury of the Macarena, ADS Arcade, AI Jokes mashup directly into the gatekeeper's chassis. Ha. 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 Why did the custodian cross the road? To reset the chicken to 5 a.m. The synthesized voice shrieked. The gatekeeper stopped dead in its tracks. The noise was physically painful, a sonic assault designed to disrupt the advanced targeting systems. For a moment, the massive drone looked almost confused. Its multiple weapon systems spun trying to categorize the sensory data. Kaine used the priceless moment of hesitation. Anya. Now. Anya hit the override for the archive's sealed door. The door had been programmed to seal only upon primary threat neutralization at the refractor or if the Watchman drones were in danger. By drawing the gatekeeper to them, they had made the refractor chamber the primary threat, overriding the archive's local lockdown. The seismic sensors in Kira's comm unit registered the sudden, distant clang of the archive door lifting. The door's open, Kira. Go. 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 Thorne's voice was a powerful motivator. Kira, wounded but fueled by Kaine's tactical brilliance, dashed toward the newly opened exit. The two watchmen, unable to categorize the distraction noise and simultaneously track the vanishing target, sputtered. She was through the door and running down the corridor before they could fully lock on. Up on the surface, Valerie, the master override key clutched tight, was crawling through the final narrow segment of the secondary vent. She had used her specialized stealth training and the chaos of the main facility to make good progress. Her plan was simple. Get the key to the surface, find a way to hijack a utility vehicle, and wait until 11:59 p.m. to return, use the key, and claim sole victory. The others could be the necessary, bloody diversion. As she emerged from the vent into a deserted supply shed, the Macarena blasted at maximum volume. She winced, shielding her ears. Custodian. I know what you did last summer. It was 88 times. Ha, ha, ha. The sound was coming from the refractor area, confirming Kaine's successful diversion. She checked the key, it was safe. She looked at her watch, 11:25 a.m. She had plenty of time. Valerie. Stop. The voice was rough, familiar, and deeply, utterly disappointed. Valerie spun around, raising her weapon instantly. Standing in the doorway of the supply shed was Thorne, who had emerged from his utility tunnel above the archives and taken a rapid, cross-facility route, anticipating her betrayal. He didn't have his demolitions pack. He only held his sidearm, leveled and unwavering. Thorner. Don't be a fool. I have the key. The mission is secure. I'm just cutting out the unnecessary variables. Kaine is sacrificing himself to the gatekeeper. You know he is. Valerie kept her voice low, persuasive. Kaine is making a sacrifice for the team, Valerie. You're making a sacrifice for you. There's a difference, Thorne stated, his eyes cold. Kira is wounded, trapped, and you left her for dead. That's not a variable. That's desertion. It's iteration 89, Marcus. Why risk 2 lives when 1 is sufficient for the goal? You know the rules. We reset. She'll wake up fine. Valerie pleaded, her finger tightening on the trigger. We reset dead, Valerie. We wake up with the memory of the filth we committed. And that memory never resets, Thorne countered. The loop is designed to save our lives, but it doesn't save our decency. You lost yours a long time ago. Drop the key. Valerie knew she couldn't outdraw Thorne, the mountain of a man who moved with surprising speed. But she also knew she could capitalize on his moral weakness. He wouldn't shoot to kill instantly. She made her move, dropping her rifle and throwing the master key into the air in a high, unpredictable arc towards the rear exit of the shed. As Thorne's eyes followed the key, Valerie lunged for a nearby shelving unit, pulling down a cascade of heavy chemical canisters, creating a wall of smoke and noise. Fool! Valerie screamed and vanished into the smoke. Thorne swore, ignoring Valerie to dive for the key. It clattered to the floor, stopping just inches from a deep drain pipe. He snatched it up, his hand closing around the cold black device. He looked around the empty shed. Valerie was gone. She was now a rogue element, armed and operating within the constraints of the loop. Captain. I have the key. Valerie is loose. She's unarmed but highly motivated to retrieve this device, Thorne reported, his voice heavy with reluctant failure. Status of the gatekeeper? Still confused, Captain. But it's cycling its weapon systems. The Macarena is losing its effectiveness. Leo's voice was high-pitched. Kaine knew this was the point of no return. The gatekeeper was adapting. It was starting to categorize the sound as background noise, and focusing on the 3 human targets. Anya. The device, Kaine said, tapping the EMP device strapped to his thigh. Anya nodded, her face grim. They had planned this as the final contingency against the gatekeeper, designed to temporarily disable its core systems at close range. It was a suicide run. The electromagnetic field required to disrupt the massive drone would also momentarily fry their comms and weapon systems, leaving them totally exposed. Kira is moving to rendezvous at Utility Nexus 7. I need to be in the refractor chamber to deploy this, Kaine stated. I'll go with you, Captain, Anya said instantly. I need to monitor the refractor's feedback signatures in real time. If that EMP destabilizes the chronal field, I need to stabilize it before the custodian triggers a catastrophic reset. Kaine looked at her, his leader's instinct warring with his duty to her safety. She was the one who could break the math of the loop. No, Anya. You stay with Leo. You are the clock. I'm the hammer. I go in, disable the gatekeeper, and buy time for Thorner and Kira to bring the key here. Then we use it, Kaine insisted. But before Anya could argue, Kira's voice, rough with exertion and pain, cut in. Negative, Captain. I'm nearing Nexus 7. I can be at the refractor chamber entrance in 3 minutes. You need to save your deployment for the final sequence. I will be your overwatch. Kira was offering herself as a last line of defense, the ultimate sacrifice. Kaine knew she was right. He needed to be focused on getting the key to the console, not wrestling the gatekeeper. All right, Kira. 3 minutes. Leo, you and Anya fall back to the secondary console when the gatekeeper passes the threshold. Thorne, your vector is direct to the refractor chamber. Do not engage Valerie. Get the key here, Kaine commanded. He stripped off his rifle, knowing he needed to be fast and light. He armed the EMP charge, gripping it tight. The gatekeeper took a slow, grinding step forward, its multiple weapon systems now locked on Kaine. Custodian protocol, the drone's synthesized voice echoed, suddenly clear of the Macarena noise. Primary threat neutralization commencing. Kaine ran directly toward the gatekeeper, straight into the lethal field of fire. He moved not like a man trying to survive, but like a tactical decision, perfectly calculated. The only thing faster than the gatekeeper's plasma fire was the reset, but Kaine was trying to beat both. He was a human bullet, aiming for the gatekeeper's primary command sensor. The air filled with the whine of charging weapons. He knew this move. He had died 31 times perfecting the approach angle. 11:32 a.m. The cost of betrayal was high, but the team's combined tactical brilliance, born of shared suffering, was finally paying off. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for their humanity. As Kaine lunged, the first plasma bolt ripped through the air where his head had been milliseconds before. The refractor chamber blast door was an open maw, and Captain Ethan Kaine was charging directly into the dragon's throat. The gatekeeper drone was massive, standing over 3 meters tall, its armored chassis bristling with weapon systems that hummed with lethal readiness. It was designed to repel an entire military assault, not a single desperate man with a small handheld EMP charge. As Kaine sprinted across the utility room floor, weaving between discarded crates and power conduits, the drone's targeting system locked onto him. The drone's logic was absolute. Threat detected. Neutralize target. A rapid burst of high-caliber rounds erupted from one of the gatekeeper's secondary cannons, impacting the wall Kaine had just passed with bone-jarring force. He threw himself into a roll, the move fluid and instantaneous, honed by the painful knowledge of 8 prior missteps. He knew the drone's firing delay, the microsecond lag between its target acquisition and its weapons engagement. That microsecond was his entire lifespan. Leo, fall back. Now, Kaine commanded. Leo Chen, pale with terror but obeying instantly, yanked the cables from his laptop and grabbed Anya's arm. They scrambled toward the secondary console, hidden behind a reinforced bulkhead, just as the gatekeeper advanced. Kaine rose, maintaining a 0-degree angle to the gatekeeper's primary sensor array, a trick he had learned in Iteration 59. By staying directly in the line of its main optical sensor, he forced the drone to rely on less precise peripheral movement sensors, buying him precious milliseconds. Thorne, status report. How close are you with the key? 5 minutes out, Captain. I'm moving as fast as this damned utility shaft will let me. Hold the line. Marcus Thorne's voice was raw with effort. The gatekeeper, recognizing Kaine's persistence, shifted tactics. It deployed 2 small wheeled suppression drones from its lower chassis. These drones were fast, low to the ground, and designed to trip or incapacitate. Kaine didn't look down. He knew they were there. He pulled a pin on a fragmentation grenade, holding the spoon until the last possible second. As the suppression drones closed in, he tossed the grenade directly between them and the gatekeeper's treads. The resulting blast was timed perfectly. It didn't destroy the gatekeeper, nothing short of a shaped charge could do that, but it jammed the primary tread system and scorched the suppression drones, momentarily halting the massive unit's advance and enveloping the area in smoke. This was his chance. Kaine burst from the smoke, running straight at the gatekeeper, ignoring the searing pain in his lungs and the phantom aches of all his previous deaths. He had to close the distance before the drone could recalibrate. The drone saw him. Its central plasma cannon began to charge, emitting a menacing blue glow, a shot that would vaporize him instantly. Kira, you're up. Now. Just as the gatekeeper's cannon reached full charge, a single, perfectly placed sniper shot rang out from a high vantage point overlooking the refractor chamber. Sergeant Major Kira Petrova, wounded and running on pure adrenaline, had arrived. The bullet, a specialized armor-piercing round, struck the gatekeeper's primary acoustic sensor. Not its eye, not its cannon, but the relatively softer targeting mic. The purpose was not to destroy, but to disrupt. The drone, confused by the sudden loss of an input sensor in the middle of a major engagement, paused its firing sequence. Its weapon systems wind down, then spun erratically as the central computer struggled to adjust its targeting parameters. Kaine launched himself onto the gatekeeper's chassis, landing hard. He ignored the automated anti-personnel current running across the metal and slammed the EMP device directly onto the main command module on the drone's back. EMP activated. Kaine roared. He hit the trigger. The blast was silent but violent. A huge blue-white electromagnetic pulse erupted from the small device, encompassing the entire chassis of the gatekeeper. For 3 agonizing seconds, the drone's colossal power plant sputtered, its lights went dark, and the hum of its weapons died entirely. It stood frozen, a statue of war. Kaine fell to the floor, his vision swimming. The residual EMP had also temporarily shorted his comms unit and caused his sidearm's electronics to fail. He was deaf, blind, and weaponless, lying on the floor next to a massive inert weapon of war. Up on the secondary console, Anya Sharma watched the chronal energy sphere, the temporal refractor, flicker wildly. The EMP created a massive localized chronal spike. Anya shouted over the sudden, crushing silence. The refractor destabilized for 0.4 seconds. We almost triggered a reset right there. Is it stabilizing? Leo demanded, his eyes fixed on her readings. It is. But the custodian is now awake. That EMP was too close to the core. It knows the threat is systemic, Anya confirmed, the fear etched deep into her face. Kira, observing from her elevated position, saw Kaine slump to the floor. She dropped her rifle, grabbed a small rope, and rappelled down, landing beside him. "Captain, report," she whispered, shaking him. Kaine blinked, the ringing in his ears subsiding. Gatekeeper down. Commencing reboot sequence. Any second. Thorne is closing fast. He's at Nexus 5. Just as Kaine struggled to his feet, the gatekeeper's optical sensors flickered back to life, glowing with an angry red intensity. The reboot was underway. The custodian's logic, interrupted, was back online and furious. And then, the voice. It wasn't the flat, synthesized warning from earlier. It was a new, cold, and utterly terrifying synthesized voice emanating directly from the gatekeeper's internal speakers. Temporal stability threatened. Threat protocol active. Manual override key retrieval required. Commencing asset acquisition. The gatekeeper had prioritized the master override key. It had stopped being a hunter and become a retrieval specialist. Suddenly, a new alarming ping sounded on Anya's console. "Captain." A new asset acquisition signal. It's not the gatekeeper. It's Valerie. Valerie Reed, having vanished into the facility's superstructure, was a ghost operating on pure self-preservation instinct. She was unarmed but had located a deactivated patrol drone in a storage closet and stripped it for parts. Using her knowledge of the Sentinel's comms frequency, she had created a temporary one-way jammer, hoping to blind Thorne as he approached the refractor chamber. She had calculated the route. Thorne, carrying the key, would use the quickest path, a long exposed corridor leading to the refractor's exterior door. Valerie emerged from a service vent directly above the corridor. She saw Thorne, sprinting, the black key clutched in his hand. She didn't call out. She didn't warn. She simply dropped a heavy metal support beam she'd pried loose earlier, sending it crashing onto the corridor floor directly in front of Thorne. The beam didn't hit him, but it slammed down with enough force to shatter the concrete and throw up a cloud of debris. Thorne stumbled, dropping the key a few feet away. "Traitor!" Thorne roared, instantly recognizing the calculated move. He drew his sidearm, but Valerie was already gone, having melted back into the shadows of the ceiling. Thorne lunged for the key, but as his fingers brushed the device, a low-powered, concentrated sonic blast hit him square in the back. It wasn't lethal, but it was powerful enough to temporarily paralyze him and send him sprawling. Valerie materialized, dropping down next to the paralyzed Thorne. She hadn't used a weapon, She had jury-rigged the patrol drone's internal communication speaker into a low-frequency sonic projector. "I told you, Marcus," Valerie whispered, snatching the key from the floor. "Survival is the ultimate loyalty. This time, I'm the one who ends the loop." She sprinted toward the refractor chamber door, the master override key secured. In the refractor chamber, the gatekeeper's reboot sequence finished with a sharp clack. Kaine was back on his feet, his comms restoring. "Thorne, report." "She took it, Captain. Valerie has the key. She's heading for your position." Thorne's voice was hoarse with rage and pain. "Perfect," Kaine said, his voice surprisingly calm. "The assets are converging. The custodian's logic is being fulfilled. The key is coming to the refractor. The problem is, it's coming with a hostile element." The gatekeeper, now fully functional, scanned the area. It identified Kaine and Kira as threats, but before it could open fire, a high-frequency priority alert flashed across its sensors. It received a live feed from the internal surveillance system. "Master override key approaching refractor chamber door." The drone stopped aiming at Kaine. Its focus shifted entirely to the entrance. Its logic was overridden. The key was the most important asset. "It's prioritizing the key." Anya yelled, "Captain, it's going to let her in, then neutralize her and retrieve the key." Kaine saw his opportunity. He looked at Kira. "Kira, you're wounded. Cover Anya and Leo. I'm engaging Valerie the moment she steps through that door." The refractor door slid open. Valerie Reed, master key in hand, stepped into the chamber, her eyes blazing with triumphant madness. She saw the colossal armed gatekeeper, the stunned Kaine, the wounded Kira, and the shimmering, impossible sphere of the refractor. "It's over, Captain," Valerie yelled. "I win. I break the loop." She raised the key, ready to jam it into the master override console. But before she could move, Kaine moved faster. He hadn't just studied the gatekeeper's movements. He had studied Valerie's movements for 88 iterations. He knew her vanity, her need for a grand, dramatic finish. He sprinted towards her, ignoring the now-revived gatekeeper, which was calculating the optimal trajectory to subdue Valerie without destroying the key. Valerie, expecting a tactical move, was surprised by Kaine's direct personal charge. She tried to sidestep him. Kaine didn't try to shoot her, which would risk the key. He executed a perfect diving leg sweep, taught to him by a Korean Special Forces operative years ago. Valerie was caught completely off guard. She crashed hard onto the floor. The key flew from her grasp, skidding across the polished steel toward the center of the chamber, directly at the base of the temporal refractor sphere. "The key is loose." Anya screamed. The gatekeeper, programmed to protect the refractor and retrieve the key, instantly switched targets. It ignored Kaine and lumbered toward the key. Valerie scrambled up, drawing a hidden combat knife. "You fool. You risked the key." "I risked you, Valerie," Kaine retorted, grabbing her wrist and twisting the knife away. "The custodian will sacrifice us all before it lets the key be destroyed. But if it focuses on retrieving the key, it ignores the real threat." He pushed Valerie roughly toward Kira, who, despite her wound, was ready to subdue the rogue operative. "Anya, Leo, the key is at the base of the refractor. The console is right there. You have to get to it before the gatekeeper." The gatekeeper was closing in, its immense shadow eclipsing the shimmering key. Anya and Leo sprinted from their cover. The gatekeeper raised one of its massive arms, not to fire but to scoop up the key. Anya reached the key first, snatched it, and jammed it into the master override console. The entire refractor chamber began to vibrate violently. The chronal sphere started to glow an angry, unstable green. The gatekeeper's logic circuit screamed an alarm. Destabilization imminent. 11:45 p.m. The final countdown had begun. "Leo, the command sequence. Hurry." Anya yelled, her hands flying across the console, pulling up the complex, multi-layered deactivation protocol for the custodian. The gatekeeper, realizing its primary objective had been achieved, the key was inserted, and that the refractor was now being actively threatened, abandoned its retrieval protocol and reverted to threat neutralization. It was coming for Kaine, Anya, and Leo. "Final engagement, Captain," Kira stated, standing over the subdued Valerie, her pistol trained on the gatekeeper. Kaine nodded, grabbing a fresh magazine and chambering around. "No, Kira. Not an engagement. Just time. We need to buy Anya 60 seconds." The battle for the loop had become a desperate close-quarters brawl against a machine determined to stop time itself. The air in the refractor chamber was thick with energy and the deafening noise of the gatekeeper's rebooted systems. The temporal refractor, that magnificent and terrible chronal sphere, pulsed with an angry, unstable emerald glow, threatening to dissolve the reality around them. Anya Sharma had the master override key inserted. The countdown to deactivation was measured in heartbeats, not minutes. "I'm in the custodian's core operating system, Captain. Protocol is executing. 60 seconds until deactivation." Anya yelled over the rising whine of the gatekeeper. Kaine glanced at the console. 11:50 p.m. They were closer than they had ever been. He drew his pistol, the weapon feeling like a child's toy against the mountainous defense drone. 60 seconds it is, Anya. Leo, monitor the chronal field. If it spikes, tell me where. The gatekeeper was now operating at peak efficiency, its targeting fully restored. It registered 3 primary threats: Kaine, Kira, and the console. It ignored the subdued Valerie, who was now pinned down by Kira, watching the chaos unfold with a mix of terror and disbelief. The drone lumbered toward the console, prioritizing the threat to the custodian protocol over the destruction of the human targets. Kaine knew he couldn't stop it with bullets. He needed to physically obstruct its movement. He sprinted around the gatekeeper's massive jointed legs, targeting the internal hydraulic lines with precision bursts of fire. Pop, pop, pop. He wasn't trying to damage the armor. He was trying to bind its locomotion. The hydraulic fluid, thick and oily, sprayed across the floor. The drone stuttered, its movement vector slightly skewed, but it didn't stop. 50 seconds. Anya's voice was strained, her eyes glued to the scrolling code on the console screen. The custodian is fighting back. It's deploying countercode. Leo Chen, his anxiety transformed into sharp, focused genius, was already on a secondary terminal. He was the only one who could handle the custodian's digital retaliation. Engaging. It's an old-school DOS-era firewall. This is hilarious. I'm hitting it with a logic bomb, Captain. Hang on. Leo slammed his hands down on the keys, his fingers moving faster than human comprehension, battling an artificial intelligence that had been running the same code for decades. Meanwhile, Thorne, having recovered from Valerie's sonic blast, burst through the refractor chamber door, his expression one of sheer, exhausted determination. He saw the scene: Kaine fighting a metallic giant, Kira pinning a traitor, and Anya and Leo desperately typing to save the world. "Captain, I'm here. What's the target?" Thorne roared. "Hydraulics. Keep it away from the console, Thorner. Anya needs 30 more seconds." Kaine ordered, dodging a massive claw swipe that tore a furrow in the concrete floor. Thorne didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy metal supply cart, the kind used to move fusion rods, and slammed it directly into the gatekeeper's remaining free leg joint with all his strength. The metal buckled with a screech of tortured steel. The gatekeeper let out a high-pitched electronic shriek of resistance and stumbled again. 40 seconds. Anya shouted, beads of sweat tracking paths through the grime on her face. The gatekeeper, now seriously impeded by the hydraulic damage and Thorne's brute force, did the only thing it could. It activated its anti-personnel defense protocol. A barrage of smoke and suppression foam erupted from its shoulders, blinding Kaine and Thorne and coating the console area. "I can't see." Kaine gasped, his eyes stinging. "The foam is localized. It's trying to obscure the console and force us back." Kira's voice was muffled by the haze. Anya and Leo, using the console's small emergency light, were forced to work blind. The pressure was immense. The refractor sphere was now crackling with temporal instability. Small, localized bubbles of time flowed backward and forward around the edges of the room, creating dizzying visual and auditory distortions. 30 seconds, Captain. The custodian is forcing a localized temporal feedback loop on the console. It's trying to reset our memory of the password. Anya yelled, her voice vibrating with fear. Leo let out a triumphant yell. I got it. Logic bomb detonated. Firewall bypassed. Sending the main deactivation key now. The code scrolled across the console at an impossible speed, the cyan script of the master override key merging with Anya's stabilization algorithms. Kaine, using muscle memory from his 88 prior engagements, moved through the smoke. He found the gatekeeper's location by the sound of its sputtering treads and the smell of ozone. He jammed the emptied magazine of his pistol into one of its optical sensors, blinding it in one eye. The gatekeeper went berserk, swinging its powerful limbs wildly. One arm clipped Kaine, sending him flying across the chamber, hitting the wall with a sickening crunch. He collapsed, breathing shallowly, the pain absolute and real. This death would be his last. Kira, seeing Kaine fall, left the struggling Valerie and fired a succession of accurate shots at the drone's primary power conduits. Areas she had learned were vulnerable but difficult to hit. The drone shrieked, the damaged internal components sparking. 20 seconds. Anya was in a zone, impervious to the chaos. The final command sequence was loading. She had stabilized the chronal field with Leo's help, and the master key was providing the bypass they needed. The fight was no longer physical. It was digital, and in this iteration Leo and Anya were faster than the machine. 10 seconds. Custodian offline. Key is executing the final command. Anya cried out in relief, leaning back, exhausted. The gatekeeper, receiving the final, fatal command, stopped moving. Its red optical sensors dimmed, then went completely dark. It stood motionless, a monument to a failed defense. Kaine pushed himself off the wall, dragging his body forward, his eyes fixed on the refractor sphere. 11:58 p.m. The emerald glow of the temporal refractor began to rapidly intensify, becoming a blazing white. The sphere started to shrink, imploding in on itself. The time distortions ceased immediately. The light was blinding, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. Kaine stared at the chronometer, waiting for the one number that would define their future. 11:59 and 58 seconds p.m. 11:59 and 59 seconds p.m. The sphere collapsed entirely into a point of impossibly bright light, then vanished. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency lights. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and totally unfamiliar. The air smelled not of ozone or death, but simply of stale facility air. 12 a.m. Nothing. No flash of green. No shock of awakening in Barracks 3. No sound of the 5 a.m. chiming clock. Kaine stood there, listening to the absolute silence of a world that had not reset. He looked at Anya, who was staring at the blank console, tears streaming down her face. He looked at Thorne, who slowly let his supply cart clatter to the ground. He looked at Kira, who was simply breathing, her exhaustion evident but her composure finally relaxed. It hums, Anya whispered, looking at the spot where the refractor had been. The timeline, it just hums. It's stable. Kaine looked at the console's built-in digital calendar. It slowly, definitively flipped over. Date: Tuesday, August 17th. It was Tuesday. The loop was broken. He stumbled forward, collapsing onto his knees, the crippling pain in his body a sudden, glorious confirmation of reality. The pain was real. The victory was real. The future was real. Thorne rushed over, helping him up. We did it, Captain. We actually died for the last time. Kaine leaned on Thorne, looking around at the exhausted faces of his team. Valerie was still huddled on the floor, stunned into silence. No, Thorner, Kaine corrected, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. We woke up for the first time. The cost of their long imprisonment, 89 lifetimes of agony, had been the price of their freedom. They were alive on a Tuesday, armed only with their memories and their scars. The world was new, but they were still carrying the immense weight of the days they had lived and died. The loop was broken, but the world was still waiting. Their mission to retrieve the refractor had technically failed. They had deactivated the custodian, but destroyed the device in the process. Now they faced the very real, non-resetting consequences of a destroyed experimental chronal engine, a rogue operative, and a host of unanswered questions about the instability they had just introduced into the timeline. The silence of Tuesday morning was heavier than any battlefield noise. It wasn't the silence before a storm. It was the silence of a clock that had stopped repeating itself, the sudden vacuum of consequence. Captain Ethan Kaine, leaning heavily against the deactivated husk of the gatekeeper drone, was cataloging his injuries. Ribs fractured from the impact with the wall, deep bruises across his torso, and the searing agony in his shoulder where the gatekeeper's arm had clipped him. All real. All requiring medical attention that the loop would no longer provide. His team, too, bore the marks of their final, non-resetting fight. Kira Petrova had a nasty plasma burn on her left shoulder, still smoking slightly. Marcus Thorne was nursing a severely wrenched knee from the sonic blast and the subsequent charge. Anya Sharma and Leo Chen were physically unharmed, but the mental exhaustion of battling the custodian's core logic was visible in their drained, hollow expressions. Status report, Kaine managed, his voice hoarse and raw. His leadership was the last thing to reset. Kira, despite her pain, snapped to attention. Valerie Reed is secured. Handcuffed to the refractor console. She's in shock, Captain. The linear timeline hit her hard. Kaine walked slowly toward Valerie, ignoring the pain. Valerie, who had seen the loop as a training simulator with zero consequences, was now facing the grim reality of her desertion and attempted theft. She looked less like a hardened operative and more like a frightened child. Valerie, Kaine said, his voice flat. Do you understand what happened? Valerie blinked, her eyes wide and unfocused. The sphere. It went away. It didn't reset. It's Tuesday. I'm injured. That's not right. It's very right, Valerie, Kaine affirmed. Your actions now have consequence. In the eyes of the law, you assaulted a teammate, deserted your post, and attempted to steal a classified device. You traded the lives of your team for a few hours of personal glory. You are now a prisoner. Valerie stared at Kira, then at Thorne, the realization of her fate. Court-martial, disgrace, and prison, finally sinking in. The ultimate training simulation had ended, and she had failed the humanity test. What about the device? Thorne interjected, nodding toward the spot where the refractor had collapsed. Anya approached the space, deploying a compact sensor suite. The temporal refractor is gone. Completely. The energy sphere wasn't contained. It was neutralized by the custodian's final shutdown command. The custodian protocol, in its last act of self-preservation, sacrificed the refractor to fully stabilize the timeline and terminate the threat, us. So the machine we were sent to retrieve is destroyed, Kaine concluded. The mission is a failure in the eyes of our contractors. Not entirely, Captain, Anya countered, pointing to her screen. Look at this residual data. The custodian didn't just destroy the refractor. It left a massive residual chronal footprint in the area. This valley is now the central node of a new temporal anomaly. We haven't just broken the loop. We've created an unstable anchor point. Leo chimed in, his excitement overcoming his terror. Yeah, the loop didn't happen for nothing. All that concentrated, repeated time energy had to go somewhere. The custodian stabilized the timeline, but this location is now temporally magnetic. Things might start flowing backward in a localized way if we don't contain it. This was the terrifying unknown cost. They had escaped their prison, but perhaps unleashed something far worse onto the world. The time they had stolen, lived, and relived was now seeking equilibrium. Kaine took charge of the crisis. They spent the next hour working with a grim, new determination, knowing that every action was permanent. First, medical attention. Kira administered basic first aid to Kaine's shoulder and her own plasma burn, using the limited supplies they had. The pain was a constant, sharp reminder of their success. Second, communication. Leo, using his coding genius, managed to bypass the facility's localized jammer, which had been set up to ensure the refractor's secrecy. He raised their private military contractor, the Sentinel's Central Command. Commander Graves, this is Captain Kaine, Sentinel Team Alpha. Mission status: critical success. The temporal anomaly has been neutralized, but the refractor is destroyed, requesting immediate extraction and scientific assets to Blackwood Valley. We have a serious temporal containment scenario. The response from Graves was immediate, but laced with disbelief and confusion. Kaine, we haven't heard from your team in 72 hours. We assumed you were under heavy engagement. What do you mean, neutralized? Kaine knew he couldn't explain 89 resets over an insecure channel. It's a long debrief, Commander. We stabilized a highly unstable chronal engine. We have a captive, Valerie Reed, who compromised the mission. Send the cleanup crew and a full science contingent. Now. Third, containment. Anya deployed specialized temporal field sensors around the collapsed refractor site, trying to map the residual chronal energy. She identified a decay radius of approximately 5 kilometers. We need to secure this valley immediately, Captain. The residual energy is radiating. It's creating minor phase shifts in the surrounding reality. Nothing major yet, but it could attract outside attention, Anya warned. Thorne, despite his injured knee, began setting up a perimeter. He found his abandoned demolition pack from Iteration 88, perfectly preserved in the location where he had left it before the failed attempt to destroy the refractor. The irony was almost overwhelming. As the sun fully rose on Tuesday, casting long, stark shadows across the silent, abandoned facility, Kaine allowed himself a moment of reflective introspection. He sat on a piece of debris, watching the light change. 88 failures. 88 deaths. 88 chances to learn, to grow, to choose different paths. The shared memory was their greatest tool, but also their heaviest burden. He remembered the early iterations, the fear, the senseless slaughter, the indulgence. He remembered when he tried to reason with the custodian through the comms, Iteration 7, when he tried to simply walk away, Iteration 14, and when he tried to leverage the lottery numbers Leo had memorized, Iteration 25. Every path had led to 5 a.m. He looked at Kira, meticulously checking her weapon, now treating it with respect, not cynicism. He looked at Thorne, who was using his formidable strength to barricade the main exit, his face set with a renewed sense of purpose. The loop had broken them down, but it had rebuilt them into something harder, truer. They were no longer just an elite military unit. They were survivors of a shared eternity. Anya approached Kaine, holding a small, fragmented piece of metal, a piece of the custodian's internal mechanism. Captain, I ran an analysis on this fragment. The custodian protocol was complex, designed to ensure stability above all else. But I found something in the code. A secondary subroutine, Anya explained, her voice lowered. The custodian wasn't just resetting the timeline. It was trying to prevent a catastrophic future paradox resulting from the refractor's operation. What does that mean? Kaine asked, his tactical mind immediately focusing on the implication. It means the refractor wasn't just a machine. It was an accidental time travel trigger. Our original mission, if successful, might have caused a total timeline collapse. The custodian, despite its deadly means, was fundamentally trying to save time itself by keeping us trapped in the loop. The fifth-hour curse was a global failsafe, not a weapon against us. The implication was staggering. They had spent 88 lifetimes fighting their savior, and their desperate escape had averted a catastrophe only by destroying the source of the paradox. Kaine looked out at the morning sun, thinking about the unconfirmed temporal anomalies mentioned in their mission brief, the whispers of unstable time they had dismissed as fiction. So we went from being prisoners of time to being the inadvertent keepers of the timeline, Kaine mused. We are, Anya confirmed. And that means our job isn't over. The residual energy, the chronal footprint, that's our next mission. We have to make sure the time we stole doesn't destroy the world we just saved. They had broken the loop, but in doing so they had opened the door to an entirely new linear war, a war against the cascading unknown effects of a destabilized timeline. The enemy was no longer the clock. The enemy was entropy. Kaine finally allowed himself to fully accept the pain, the exhaustion, and the immense responsibility. He stood up straight, his gaze sweeping over his scarred, victorious team. All right, Sentinels. We have 2 hours until extraction. Thorne set up explosive charges around the refractor site perimeter, We need a clean geological barrier. Kira, you're handling Valerie and the first debrief. Anya, Leo, focus on mapping the decay radius. We need every piece of data. We may have lived 89 Mondays, but today is the first day of the rest of the world. He picked up his pistol, which he had checked for EMP damage. It was working. He holstered it. The mission objective is containment. We don't just secure the area, we secure the future. 2 hours felt like 2 minutes. The team, operating with the intense synchronized efficiency born of shared eternity, had secured the Blackwood Valley facility's subterranean entrance, planted perimeter charges, and gathered critical data on the chronal decay radius. They moved not as a military unit, but as a deeply cohesive unit of ghosts who understood the geometry of this place better than its original builders. At 2 p.m., the sound of rotors finally cut through the heavy silence of the valley. A heavy-lift transport helicopter, bearing the insignia of the Sentinel's private military corporation, descended through the cloud layer. It was followed closely by 2 smaller, faster escort gunships, a clear sign that Central Command suspected the breach was more serious than a simple security failure. Kaine, standing next to the deactivated gatekeeper drone, watched the arrival with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Relief that the waiting was over, trepidation because he knew the truth they carried was unbelievable, even to their own command structure. The moment the ramp of the transport dropped, a figure emerged. Commander Graves, Kaine's direct superior. Graves was a man whose authority was as sharp as his tailored uniform, but his expression was one of profound shock. He took one look at the wreckage of the utility room, the still-smoking plasma burn on Kira's shoulder, the shackled Valerie, and the immense silent bulk of the deactivated gatekeeper. Kaine, what in God's name happened here? We received a distress signal 72 hours ago. Then nothing. Your team was presumed Kia. Now you call in talking about chronal containment and a destroyed refractor. Graves' voice was low, taut with suppressed anger. Commander, welcome to Tuesday, Kaine stated, his own voice rough. The refractor was operational, but dangerously unstable. We initiated a core protocol shutdown. The machine neutralized itself, but not before trapping us in a localized repeating temporal loop. Graves stared at him. A loop. Captain, are you injured worse than you look? Are you suffering from combat fatigue? That machine was designed to detect theoretical temporal anomalies, not create a science fiction scenario. Ask Dr. Sharma, Commander, Kaine responded, nodding to Anya. She has the mathematical proof. We lived the same Monday, 89 times. We died, were wounded, and watched the world reset precisely at 5 a.m. every iteration. We were forced to break the loop by destroying the custodian protocol via the master override key, which ultimately caused the refractor's final self-destruction. Anya stepped forward, presenting Graves with her battered laptop. Commander, the chronal decay data is irrefutable. The facility acted as a highly localized, recursive timeline. We fought an automated defense AI that reset the clock whenever its primary asset, the refractor, was under threat. This is not fatigue. This is 89 lifetimes of data collection. Graves looked at the complex scrolling algorithms, his professional disbelief battling the visceral evidence of the wrecked room and the genuine trauma on his captain's face. The extraction operation was meticulously organized. A team of specialized engineers immediately began working on dismantling the gatekeeper and assessing the structural integrity of the refractor core site. Thorne, favoring his injured knee, handed a geological map to one of Graves' accompanying tactical officers. This area, the red zone, is where the residual energy is highest. We need to install a deep, Faraday cage containment grid, immediately. I've planted demolition charges as a contingency to isolate the sector if the decay radius expands faster than anticipated. Demolition charges, Thorne? You're preparing to collapse the valley? The officer asked, stunned. If the temporal phase shifts start hitting the surrounding towns, yes. We have to secure the future, Lieutenant. We learned that the hard way, Thorne replied, his cynicism replaced by a weary finality. Leo Chen, meanwhile, was sequestered with a team of Sentinel's in-house data scientists. The scientists, viewing Leo's work on the custodian's programming, were utterly baffled by the speed and complexity of his countercode. especially the segment relating to the Macarena distraction. Mr. Chen, this logic path, the use of a chaotic, non-military audio track to overload the Watchman drone processors, it's brilliant, but utterly unconventional. Where did you find the algorithm? One scientist asked, his finger tracing the bizarre code. Leo shrugged, rubbing his temples. Iteration 23. I spent the day trying to hack the facility's cafeteria jukebox, and I accidentally discovered the custodian's vulnerability to complex, repetitive noise. We call it Kronos Gambit. The most difficult confrontation was yet to come. Valerie Reed was loaded onto the transport, under heavy guard. As she was led up the ramp, she struggled, looking back at Kaine. You're going to let them lock me away? After all we went through. I got the key. I secured the mission, she cried, the reality of her permanent fate finally causing her to break. Kaine followed her onto the ramp. You secured the key for yourself, Valerie. You left a wounded teammate to die, believing the loop would erase your moral failure. The loop didn't save your life. It only preserved your conscience until today. You betrayed the team, and in a linear timeline, that is permanent. But the memory. We have the memories. We know what we can do, she insisted, desperate to use their shared trauma as justification. The memory is a weapon, Valerie. You used it as an excuse, Kaine said, his eyes hard. He knew that the hardest part of their freedom was the burden of their shared past. They would forever carry the weight of those repeated deaths, those reckless choices, and the knowledge of who they truly were when consequences didn't exist. Graves intervened, pulling Kaine aside. Captain, the scientific team is confirming Dr. Sharma's data. The chronal signature is off the charts. We need you to fly with us now. We have to debrief the White House immediately on this paradox. You and Dr. Sharma are now the world's leading experts on this event. Kaine looked back at the ruined facility, the immense responsibility settling onto his weary shoulders. The mission was over, but the consequence was global. Commander, Kaine said, stepping onto the ramp of the transport, we need to ensure this story doesn't get out. If the world learns we just spent 89 days fighting a temporal loop, the panic alone could destabilize the political landscape. We need a cover story. Graves nodded, already thinking 3 steps ahead. An energy core meltdown. Localized containment zone. Total blackout. Nobody gets in or out of Blackwood Valley. As the transport lifted off, ascending into the main sky, Kaine looked down at the facility, the scene of his long, agonizing imprisonment. It was silent, contained, and finally permanent. Later, aboard the transport, Kaine sat opposite Kira, who was receiving a saline drip for her wound. She had cleaned and inspected every piece of their gear, her focus still unbroken. We're alive, Captain, Kira said quietly. But we're different. We lived a lifetime of consequences-free existence. How do we go back to the real world? Kaine closed his eyes, remembering the feel of every death, every reset. We carry the scars of every Monday, Kira. We know how easily things can break and how much a single second matters. We are forged by the loop. We don't go back. We go forward and we apply the lessons. He looked at Anya, sitting next to Leo, both already working on advanced computational models for chronal containment. They were no longer just a military and science team. They were the collective memory of a future that almost didn't happen. Kaine stood, moving toward the cockpit to speak with Graves. He had an idea born not of military strategy, but of the deep, absolute need to control the consequences of their action. Commander Graves, Kaine addressed his superior, who was already on a scrambled satellite link. We can't just debrief and go back to our lives. We are the only people on Earth with the collective memory of 90 timelines. We know where every fault line is. We are perfectly equipped to handle the fallout of this event. What are you proposing, Captain? Graves asked, lowering his secure phone. I propose the creation of a new, highly specialized unit, Commander. A permanent task force dedicated to monitoring and neutralizing temporal anomalies resulting from the Blackwood event. We are the only ones who know what to look for, the only ones who recognize the temporal echoes, Kaine articulated, his military training now fully coalescing with his shared trauma. He looked at his team, Thorne, the philosopher-engineer, Kira, the the stoic observer, Anya, the chronal expert, and Leo, the chaotic genius. We are the Sentinels, Commander, but we are now the keepers of the timeline. We need to be permanently deployed in Blackwood, monitoring the chronal residue. We are the best insurance policy the world has against time itself. Graves studied him for a long silent moment, recognizing the iron conviction in Kaine's eyes. He knew this was not an escape. It was a deeper commitment. The keepers of the timeline, Graves mused. I like it, Kaine. I'll make the call. The helicopter banked sharply, heading south towards the waiting world. They were free of the loop, but their new mission, a permanent deployment to guard the fragile stability of time, had just begun. The 89 Mondays were over, but the infinite Tuesday had just begun. The creation of the keepers of the timeline was ratified with astonishing speed. The inherent secrecy surrounding the destroyed refractor, combined with Anya Sharma's irrefutable data on the localized chronal decay, convinced global authorities that a covert, highly specialized containment unit was essential. Within 72 hours of escaping the loop, Kaine's team was back in Blackwood Valley. The site was now an official geological containment zone, fenced, fortified, and monitored by standard Sentinel forces, none of whom knew the true nature of the ruin beneath the soil. The keepers, Kaine, Kira, Thorne, Anya, and Leo, were given a command center in a newly constructed, shielded bunker just outside the 5-kilometer decay radius. They were armed not with heavy weaponry, but with custom-built chronal sensors, phase meters, and Leo's constantly evolving suite of counter-programming tools. Their mission: detect, understand, and neutralize any secondary temporal anomalies arising from the destruction of the refractor. Their life was a quiet, intense vigilance, a stark contrast to the explosive chaos of the loop. They were 5 people carrying the memory of 89 lifetimes, forever estranged from the linear world. Decay radius holding stable at 4.95 kilometers, Captain, Anya reported, running her diagnostic from the command center console. The residual energy signature is dissipating, but it is slow. It will take years for this area to return to baseline temporal stability. Kaine, staring at a satellite map of the valley, nodded. Years of waiting. Years of silence. After 89 days of mandatory adrenaline, the silence is the toughest enemy. Thorne, who was now their primary containment engineer and perimeter chief, grunted from his station. I prefer silence to the Macarena, Captain. But you're right. This waiting feels like a trick. Like the clock is just pausing to refuel for iteration 90. Leo, still wearing the slightly manic energy of his time loop genius, was busy perfecting a new alarm system. I'm integrating a new AI, Captain. Not the custodian. I call her Chronos Shadow. She'll alert us to any phase shift above $10 carat, minus $12 seconds. She won't be sarcastic, I promise. Despite the technological sophistication, their most reliable detector remained their own collective memory. They had lived the local timeline so many times that any deviation, no matter how small, felt wrong. A bird singing too early, a shadow falling in a slightly off angle, the wrong item stocked on a shelf in a nearby abandoned guard shack. These were the triggers that sent them scrambling. The first genuine anomaly struck on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after their escape. It happened just outside the established containment perimeter, in the small, forgotten logging road that led into the valley. Chronos Shadow blared a muted alarm. Phase shift detected. Magnitude: $5 times 10 carat, minus $11 seconds. Location: Sector Charlie, 7. Low magnitude but persistent. Phase shift: a temporal skip. Kaine was instantly alert. Not a skip, Captain, Anya said, her fingers flying across the sensor feed. It's an echo. It's not the present changing. It's the past momentarily bleeding into the present. The duration is only 300 milliseconds, but it's repeating. Kira, Thorne, gear up. We go in light, Kaine commanded, strapping on his modified chronal dampening vest, a new piece of gear designed to resist minor temporal fluctuations. They reached Sector Charlie, 7, a thickly wooded area, within 5 minutes. The air felt heavy and cold, despite the warm September sun. The trees looked subtly wrong, their shadows cast at a slightly impossible angle. "I'm picking up localized chronal decay, Captain," Kira reported, holding a handheld phase meter. "It's centered on the logging road. Right there." Kaine stepped into the road. The anomaly was invisible to the naked eye, but the phase meter was screaming. He saw nothing, heard nothing, but felt a chilling sense of absolute déjà vu. Not the memory of a reset, but the actual presence of a moment he knew shouldn't exist. "Thorne, secure the perimeter. Kira, thermal scan. Anya, Leo, feed us real-time data." Thorne, weapon ready, moved into the tree-lane. The moment he stepped onto the ground next to the road, he froze. "Captain." "Stop," Thorne whispered, his voice laced with confusion. "Look at the ground. Right there." Kaine looked down. Pressed into the damp earth, barely visible, were three distinct impressions: the deep tread marks of a heavy military vehicle, a scuff mark left by a heavy object being dragged, and a distinct, small, flat indentation. Vehicle tracks. Something heavy was moved here. "But why are you stopping?" Kaine pressed. "These tracks," Thorne said, kneeling down and running his finger over the deep tread. "They belong to the Sentinel's old MK-4 APC. The one we drove in iteration 45. The one Leo crashed into the generator. It was decommissioned decades ago, Captain. It shouldn't be here. It shouldn't have been here for decades." Kira raised her thermal scanner. "Captain, I have a thermal reading. Faint but perfectly defined. Right on the road. It's a heat signature, but it's residual, like a temporary combustion source just went out." Anya's voice crackled through the comms, tense with alarm. "Kaine, the phase shift is spiking. It's stabilizing into a persistent, visible echo. Be careful." The air in the middle of the road shimmered. It wasn't the sick green of the loop reset, but a pale, shimmering silver, like seeing through a sheet of fast-running water. The silver shimmer condensed, focusing into a distinct, blurry image. It was a man. A ghost. The figure was dressed in the faded, obsolete uniform of a Sentinel's operative from 30 years ago. He was hunched over a heavy equipment box, his face grim and covered in soot. He wasn't aware of Kaine or the Keepers. He was simply there, stuck in the loop of an action he had performed years ago. A temporal echo, a physical manifestation of an event from the past bleeding into the present due to the chronal decay. "My God," Kira whispered. "A ghost." "He's not a ghost, Kira. He's an echo. A moment caught in the instability." "He's a memory made physical," Kaine said, gripping his weapon but not raising it. The echo was real, tangible. It solidified just long enough for Kaine to recognize the heavy equipment box the man was carrying. It was a specialized quantum battery used to power the refractor. The man was setting up the power supply. The Echo Man finished securing the box. He wiped sweat from his brow. Then his eyes flickered, not seeing Kaine, but suddenly widening in what looked like extreme terror. He raised his hand toward the sky, pointing. Before Kaine could process the gesture, the image dissolved in a silent splash of silver light. The temporal echo was gone, leaving only the damp earth, the wrong shadows, and the persistent coldness in the air. Thorne rushed forward, examining the spot. He was setting up a power unit. 30 years ago, this man was powering up the refractor. He was pointing at something. Kira checked her thermal. The combustion source. It just spiked and vanished, like a temporary portal closing. Kaine, however, was focused on the memory of the Echo Man's terrified expression and the direction of his pointing finger. North, directly at the mountain ridge overlooking the Blackwood facility. He was pointing at the ridge. He was terrified of something up there, Kaine murmured. Something was happening during the refractor's original activation that caused this man to imprint a moment of terror onto the timeline. Leo's panicked voice came over the comms. "Captain, I'm getting a massive secondary phase signature. North Ridge. The decay is shifting. The echo wasn't a random event. It was a precursor." "Precursor to what, Specs?" Kaine demanded. "Precursor to a high-magnitude anomaly. The residual energy is concentrating on the ridge. It looks like a large, non-biological object, Captain. It's not an echo. It's an intrusion. Leo's voice was vibrating with genuine fear. The keepers had gone from fighting a temporal prison to facing the consequences of their liberation. The destruction of the refractor had ripped a hole in time, and something was about to step through. Kaine looked at Kira and Thorne, his expression grim. We don't know what's coming, but we know it terrified a man 30 years ago. This is why we have the memories, sentinels. We know how to move fast. We know how to fight the impossible. He raised his comms to the command center. Anya, Leo, lock down the base. Set Chronos' shadow to maximum alert. Thorne, Kira, we're moving to the North Ridge. Prepare for aggressive temporal engagement. Whatever is coming, it's not from our timeline, and it's not friendly. The Infinite Tuesday had finally presented its first permanent existential threat. The ascent to the North Ridge was a brutal climb, but Captain Ethan Kaine, Kira Petrova, and Marcus Thorne moved with the synchronized, practiced rhythm of 89 shared lifetimes. Above them, the sky was still an ordinary blue, but the air felt charged, metallic, and utterly wrong. Anya, Leo, report. Kaine's voice was strained, echoing his rapid exertion. Anya Sharma's voice, tight with urgency, came over the comms. The energy is consolidating, Captain. It's highly focused chronal energy, but it's dense, like an object is forcing its way through the decay radius. It's opening a temporary, one-way phase aperture on the ridge. Can you stabilize it? Or close it? Kira demanded, scrambling over loose shale. Negative. The energy signature is massive. It's designed to punch through. Leo is deploying Chronos Shadow's full jamming capacity, targeting the localized frequency of the intrusion, but it's a shot in the dark. Anya replied. As they reached the summit of the ridge, Kaine saw it. Directly overlooking the contained Blackwood Valley facility, the air was violently tearing itself open. It wasn't a stable portal, but a jagged, flickering temporal aperture, a rent in the fabric of time, pulsing with a painful, blinding white light. And something was emerging. It was large, angular, and made of a heavy, dark alien alloy. It was a sophisticated, futuristic drone, far larger and more heavily armed than the gatekeeper. This was the entity that had terrified the operative 30 years ago, the object that had imprinted its destructive arrival onto the timeline. It's a heavy-class armed intrusion unit, Thorne hissed, raising his rifle. It doesn't look like anything from our timeline, or even the refractor's schematics. Leo's voice crackled, laced with manic excitement and terror. Captain. Analysis complete. The intrusion unit is emitting a passive chronal field. It's designed to erase temporal inconsistencies. It's a cleanup drone, designed to neutralize the paradox caused by the refractor's initial operation. It's hunting us. Kaine instantly grasped the horrifying logic. The custodian protocol was the friendly AI trying to contain the team locally. This drone, the Paradox Killer, was the ultimate lethal failsafe from a future timeline, sent to completely sanitize the entire Blackwood anomaly, likely by vaporizing everything, including the keepers. The drone solidified, its angular frame locking into their reality. It identified Kaine and his team instantly. Paradox detected. Neutralization protocol initiated. Its primary weapon, a massive rotating energy cannon, began to charge, emitting a deep, high-frequency whine that vibrated in their chests. Fire now. Aim for the chronal stabilizers on the chassis. Don't let it get a clean shot. Kaine yelled, dropping into cover behind a boulder. Kira and Thorne opened fire, their specialized ammunition sparking harmlessly off the drone's heavy armor plating. Kaine knew conventional weapons were useless. They had to hit its temporal core, the device keeping it anchored in this timeline. Anya, where is the stabilizing anchor on that thing? Kaine demanded, his rifle now targeting the ground near the drone's feet, trying to disrupt its posture. Anya's voice was a torrent of data. It's central, Captain, under the main optical sensor, but it's shielded by a phase amplifier. Standard EMP won't work. Leo, the Macarena. Can you weaponize the chaotic frequency against its chronal field? Kaine asked, remembering the only thing that broke the custodian's logic. I can try, But I need to reroute Chrono's shadow through the facility's old seismic sensor array. It's the only way to get a wide enough frequency burst. Leo stammered. It'll take 30 seconds to initiate the sequence. 30 seconds, Kaine confirmed, his eyes fixed on the charging cannon of the Paradox Killer. That's what we buy. Thorne, Kira, draw its fire. Keep it focused on us, not the valley. The Paradox Killer fired. The blast was not plasma. It was pure, focused chronal energy, a beam of blue light that did not explode, but rather instantly dissolved the boulder Kira was hiding behind, leaving only a shimmering, empty space where the stone had been. Kira, having anticipated the drone's immense power from Kaine's urgency, was already sprinting to new cover. Thorne began a tactical retreat, firing wildly to draw the drone's targeting away from the facility below. Kaine knew this was the suicide run he had practiced 88 times. He had the only tool that might work, a heavily modified specialized EMP grenade Thorne had built years ago, specifically designed to counter the Gatekeeper's temporal systems. He broke cover, sprinting toward the drone. The Paradox Killer instantly locked onto him, recognizing him as the primary threat. Thorne. Suppression. Thorne fired a small localized explosive charge, not at the drone, but on the ground in front of it. The resulting smoke and debris briefly obscured the drone's vision. In that millisecond, Kaine hurled the EMP grenade. It didn't have to detonate, it only had to anchor. The grenade was designed with a magnetic casing, and it slammed squarely onto the drone's main optical sensor. The drone registered the projectile and began its countermeasure sequence, but it was too late. The grenade, its timer set for the shortest possible duration, erupted in a violent, localized electromagnetic pulse, directly in front of the drone's eyes. The blast didn't destroy the drone, but it overloaded its primary optical sensor and, crucially, temporarily disrupted the phase amplifier protecting its core. Leo. Now. Kaine roared, throwing himself onto the ground as the Paradox Killer started spinning, its cannon firing blindly into the sky. In the command center, Leo Chen had his face pressed close to the screen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Here we go. Macarena for the Paradox Killer. Hope the future loves bad 90s music. He hit the sequence. The chaotic stream of the Macarena, 80s arcade noise, and sarcastic AI jokes blasted through the seismic array's powerful, subterranean speakers. The sound waves traveled up through the earth, hitting the drone not just through the air but through the ground. The drone instantly froze. Its logic was built for lethal efficiency and paradox removal. It was not built for musical chaos. The energy emanating from its temporal core began to fluctuate wildly, unable to process the conflicting data stream that was overwhelming its sensory inputs. It's working, Captain. The Macarena is creating a phase conflict. It's struggling to maintain its anchor. Anya screamed, her relief palpable. Kaine scrambled up, running toward the struggling drone. The chronal energy was pouring out of it, creating localized pockets of backward-flowing time around its chassis. Tiny, harmless resets that affected only debris. Kira. Thorne. Target the central seam. The Macarena has dropped the shielding. Kaine commanded. Kira and Thorne, now using specialized phase-piercing rounds, concentrated their fire on the newly exposed glowing seam beneath the shattered optical sensor. Crack, crack, crack. The rounds impacted, one after the other, striking the temporal core of the Paradox Killer. With the seventh round, the core, a shimmering crystalline structure, cracked. A deafening implosion followed. The Paradox Killer did not explode. It simply vanished, collapsing inward in a silent, high-frequency wave of light, pulled back through the unstable aperture it had created. The phase aperture above them slammed shut with the sound of displaced air, leaving behind only the cold, clear sky. Silence. Heavy, complete silence. Kaine fell onto the summit, breathing deeply, every cell in his body screaming in pain, but his mind perfectly clear. Anomaly neutralized, he gasped. Anya's voice was full of tears, relief, and absolute awe. It's gone, Captain. The paradox is gone. The chronal decay radius. It's stabilizing faster than predicted. The intrusion drained the residual energy. We didn't just win, We used the Paradox Killer to clean up its own mess. Kaine, Kira, and Thorne made the slow, painful descent, their bodies bruised and broken, but their victory absolute. The Keepers of the Timeline returned to the command center. They had won. They had not only escaped their prison but had successfully neutralized the existential threat their escape had unleashed, all by leveraging the intimate, unique knowledge gained from their shared repetitive agony. They were the ultimate survivors. Kaine stood over Anya and Leo, who were now running diagnostics on the newly stable timeline. The loop is gone, the threat is neutralized, and the timeline is secure, Kaine summarized. The 89 deaths were the price of our expertise, and we paid it well. He looked at his team, his family. They were all irrevocably changed. Thorne was now a grounded engineer, not a cynic. Kira was a silent anchor, her stoicism protecting her from the emotional fallout. Anya was the master of time, and Leo, finally, had a real-world application for his genius. The world doesn't know what we saved it from, or how many times we had to die to learn how, Kaine said softly. Our mission continues. The anomalies will be small now, minor echoes, but we are the only ones who can see them. He placed his hand on the console, now humming softly, the sound of a stable, linear future. The memory of the sick green light and the 5 a.m. chime was fading, replaced by the reality of Tuesday. We are the Keepers of the Timeline, Sentinels. We move forward, permanently armed with the memory of yesterday. The agonizing loop was broken. They were alive, they were together, and they had found a new, noble purpose in their shared trauma. The bitter taste of Iteration 88 was replaced by the clean, sharp taste of an infinitely unfolding Tuesday. The team was safe, the mission transitioned to containment, and the future was secured by their sacrifice. The victory was a hard-won redemption, earned across 89 lifetimes. That story was intense. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the 89 agonizing iterations of Captain Kaine's struggle against the clock and the final victory of the Keepers of the Timeline, be sure to like this story and subscribe for more epic, complex, and high-stakes narratives.